Hi everybody. This is Mariusz Wszołek, and I'll be the host of this extraordinary gathering of Next Generation Club, organized by Graphic Design Department and the Design Institute of University SWPS. For those who join us for the very first time, the Next Generation Club consists of seminars designed to update knowledge and facilitate experience exchange in science, teaching, but mostly design. And I'm so excited to introduce a very special guest, a guest from whom we had the chance to learn about social design and social approach to design, a guest for whom we had to change actually the approach of our meeting. Usually, Next Generation Club is a simple gathering of small university community that is interested in design, but this time the interests of this event exceed our previous logistical capabilities, so we turn it into an official webinar with access to entire university community. And I have those data that nearly 900 people sign up for this meeting. So thank you very much, all of you. And I never thought that I will have this possibility to say it, but ladies and gentlemen, Donald Norman is on the board with us today. Welcome, Donald, and thank you for joining our community.
Thank you.
I was
Thank
thinking
you.
how to introduce you to our audience, and every scenario I was thinking about was a bit of cliche or useless due to the ubiquity of your of you in design community. Obviously, I could start with this phrase like Donald Norman is a pioneer in the field of design and key advocate for human-centered approaches as the author of influential books such as Design and Emotion, Design of Everyday Things, and Design for a Better World. He has shaped the way we think about design impacts on human experience. But when I was preparing for this meeting, I listened to the interview for the Creative Cops titled Why Being Wrong Made Me Successful, in which you introduced yourself by starting with this phrase, I'm 89 years old, and this is not my first retirement. And I think this is a really nice starting of the for starting for introducing yourself. Would that be possible to continue with this approach, Don?
Huh. Well, I'm curious, always curious. And I think it's a very important trait for all designers to be curious about the world, about things you see, about how people behave. But also my curiosity often gets in the way. Uh, my wife always complains that when we're walking down the street, we're talking and having a nice conversation, and suddenly I've stopped and I'm staring at something. Well, I saw something, it was interesting, but it interrupts our conversation. It also means that I interrupt my own thinking at times, and I change my fields over and over and over again because I get curious about this, that, and the other, and I start investigating, and soon discover I'm in another field. A good example is design. I have been in the field now for a long time, but I was never trained as a designer. I started off as an electrical engineer trying to design electronic circuits. I was interested in computers, but they didn't exist. I think there were two or three in the world when I graduated. I'm very old. Um, and so I went to get a master's degree in electrical engineering to study computers, but the people who had developed computers weren't there anymore. And so I ended up being a psychologist. Why was psychology if I cared about computers? Well, if I couldn't build computers, I could study the computer in our head. It's not really a computer, but I could study how the mind worked, I said. But that's not what psychologists did in those days. And so I was a maverick because what I did was I applied engineering principles to what I was studying in psychology. And that made me different. And that meant some people really thought I was doing interesting work, and other people criticized me. My first job was at Harvard University, and the most famous psychologist of the 20th century was B.F. Skinner. And when I was introduced to the faculty, he stood up and denounced me and denounced what I was working on. I thought that was a compliment. But I continued along this way. And when I left Harvard, I went to the University of California in San Diego, which was a university just starting. Nobody had yet graduated. we set up a program called Human Information Processing Psychology that was really quite revolutionary. Uh, it, if you were an engineer, it wasn't revolutionary at all. It was simply taking, design principles from engineering and trying to say, we even put a little computer language, basic, in fact. We had little programs in the textbook we wrote, so you could mimic the way the eye worked, or the way the ear worked, or the way the thinking worked, by writing tiny little programs as an introductory student in the university in psychology. This was unusual, but it sort of is the way I've worked in my life. I've been in many, many different fields. I've published in the artificial intelligence journals way, way, way a long time ago, way before neural networks. But neural networks started in my laboratory. We hired a new person with a brand new PhD. We were telling him the work we were doing, and he said, "No, you're wrong." Well, I like it when people tell me I'm wrong, because if I'm wrong, I need to know, right? I don't want to be wrong. And well, at this point, I was helping to develop a field that today is called human-computer interaction. So I didn't follow along with what he said, but my colleague, Dave Rumelhart, did. And they invented the first three-level neural network. And that person who interrupted me and said I was wrong, well, a few months ago, he got the Nobel Prize for his work in deep learning and neural networks. And so I've just been in many, many situations and know many people by accident, and I'm
Mm.
curious, and who knows what I am. I call myself a designer, but I don't really design like normal designers. And so all the people I know who work in similar fields, we don't like the word design because it's misunderstood. It really is design, but people think of design as making something pretty. And no, that's not what we do. We try to change people's lives for the better. Anyway, that's where I am today. Yeah, I've retired 5 times at this point, and each time I retire, I get busier and busier. And right now, I'm running the Don Norman Design Award charity. Actually, I'm not running it. My friends are running it, but I'm very busy in it, spending full time at it. And in my opinion, it's the most important activity I've ever done.
Lovely. I think you started with curiosity. Um,
Curiosity.
yeah, don't you have this kind of feeling that in a modern discourse, curiosity is a buzzword? So we use this word, but we don't actually understand what this actually means. That it's not only that I'm curious about the world, but I'm actively searching for information, looking for the problem to solve. Behave like a child in the world of adults.
No, actually, that's a little bit wrong.
All
You're
right.
in the right direction, but um, I'm curious to understand what's going on. What is this? Not to solve a problem. I don't have any problem in mind. In fact, I've discovered often I'm walking down the street and I see things and I just keep going. And then a day or two later, I'm thinking back and I say, wait a minute, that was really interesting. And then I have to run back and try to figure out where I was when I saw it and to try to understand what was it? What is that? What does it mean? But I sort of have this theory that my head is kind of like the neural network. It's the subconscious. I just fill it up with all my experiences and my curiosities and little things I've learned from this field and that field and a different field. And it all sort of gels together. And then at points every so often, I get the feeling that I'm getting to understand something and I'm starting to put it together. And all this stuff now coalesces into looking at something with a new perspective. Like my latest book, in fact, you could say all my books, there's nothing new in them because I'm taking the works of all sorts of other people that I've discovered and all sorts of other experiences that I've had that other people have had, but I put them together with a different perspective in a way that is therefore makes it meaningful to people who would never have thought about these issues. But but seeking the problem to solve is the last thing actually in the way I work.
Mm.
So as a result, I never know what I'm doing because I keep searching. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm thinking about. I don't know where I'm going. And once I finally figure it out and I sit down and I teach a class on it and I write a book on it, I'm finished. Okay, now on to the next thing. And
Mm.
so I kept feeling my students always thought I must be pretty stupid because I never knew what I was talking about. But that's what science is about. Scientists don't study things that are well known. Scientists study things that are not known. And therefore they don't know what they're studying or even how to go about studying it. But
Mhm.
yeah,
It's safe to say that curiosity is a link for the scientists and designers because both professions are about to discover something. Just because maybe it's curious enough, just to solve a problem, just to do something, but it's kind of nice link between science world and design world.
absolutely. It's actually well known that many major scientific breakthroughs occurred when something went wrong with your experiment and you got this really weird result. And most scientists throw it away. Oh, didn't do
Yeah.
that right. And every so often somebody says, wait a minute, that's interesting. And that's how we discovered penicillin, and that's how we discovered this, that, and the other. That's how the Post-it note was discovered. It was a mistake that we made this glue that didn't stick very well.
Yeah.
And so it's not just being curious, it's also recognizing when something goes wrong or something unexpected happens that, wait a minute, this may be a new opportunity.
Mhm. Yeah, that's great. When I first approached you with this invitation, you responded, and that was curious actually. You responded to me by saying that you accept only one pre-prepared question because what you value the most is open conversation. And this idea resonates deeply with me as design itself is a conversation, it's a dialogue about context, challenges, audience, and the impact we have on society and the environment. So, Don, in the spirit of open dialogue, I have just one prepared question for you. And the question is, the world we live in is way more complex than many of us can proceed in a cognitive way, information whatsoever. But what would you say to young designers? Because most of the audience we have is the young designers or the students, design students, about their influence and responsibility in shaping everyday life.
That's actually a question is remarkably difficult to answer for a number of different reasons. First, one reason you pointed out was that the world is complex, and one of the important things that I am continually discovering is how related almost everything is in the world. So let me back up a little bit. This is a book that's best known of all my books, The Design of Everyday Things.
And it was published in Polish as well.
It's been published in many different languages,
Yeah.
including Polish. And I'm here to say it's wrong. And so, what's wrong about the book? Well, actually, there's nothing wrong in the book. I still teach what's in the book, I still believe in it. What's wrong is what's not in the book. And what's not in the book is exactly what you were talking about, the fact that we live in a complex world. And when we make these beautiful objects like our cell phones and computers, and for that matter, automobiles and household appliances and everything, where do we get the materials from? How do we destroy the earth and the ecological system in getting and mining the materials, polluting the air and the water and the land, and in changing the materials into stuff that we can use in manufacturing and in the actual manufacturing process, and in the fact that so many, especially consumer goods, are designed so they only last a couple of years and then you buy a new one, but they're done so nice and so exquisitely and put together so tightly and so on. You can't take them apart. It's difficult to repair and almost impossible to also, when the life is over, to take it apart and reuse the components. And so we have piles of electronic junk all across the world burning, emitting poisonous fumes, doing no good.
Mhm.
And, even the fashion industry, clothes, that's one of the greatest polluters in the world because like 30 or 40% of clothes are thrown away without even ever having been worn. And the way the materials are put together and the way they're invented and synthesized, and even the dyes are poisonous, difficult to remove. It's difficult to reuse cloth that's been put into a garment, clothes. And so it's time we thought about all this. And so I said, well, this book is all about humanity, about human-centered design, and I have some fundamental principles, four main principles. And it's time we have to expand those principles to think about the impact our work has upon society, the world, all living things, and cultures. Digital people, people who do digital design say, oh, I don't have to worry. I'm not polluting the earth or the land or whatever. Oh, yes, you are. First of all digital products have to work on physical products. And second of all, you're you're destroying cultures, you're destroying lives because we design these digital things so they're addictive, so people stay on this site watching forever, forever, forever. That used to be considered good for business. The more people stay working on your program, your website, whatever, the better, right? No, not true. So I call this humanity-centered design, that we've taken human-centered design in HCD and we made it more HCD plus a bigger view of the world.
Mhm. Um, I wrote a book about advertisements, and I think most of information in this book is still relevant for me. But I also feel some kind of responsibility for giving fuel to improve selling buying lifestyles, but by doing ads. Do you feel somehow that your books, especially in my mind, there is also great books where I really, really like and recommended to my students, Designs and Emotions, contribute to something that you are essentially criticizing in your latest book? I mean, consumerism destroying planet in the face of beautiful design and design and emotions.
Yes, um, because I grew up learning about business. I worked for business. I was a senior executive at Apple. I was a vice president. I was a senior executive at HP. I was a head of a startup. And what we learned from business school was, in fact, with a really psychological principles on how to make things attractive to people, addictive to people, so they'll sell more, buy more. And that was good because a business that doesn't make money goes out of business. And it doesn't matter how good it is if it's failing and it can no longer pay the salaries of its workers. So businesses do a lot of good, but along the way, they often do not think about the ethics of what they're doing. And so even a good business can be doing harm unwittingly. And I feel that's how a lot of us who were trained, we thought we were doing good. We were helping businesses survive and succeed. And but yes, but there's a limit. So basically, almost any technology, any ideas can be used for good, but they can also be misused. And so I feel that what you're talking about is the misuse of the power of advertising. I
Mhm.
think advertising is essential, by the way, because there are lots of things in the world that I would really like to have and are useful to me. And how would I learn about them? And advertising is one way to learn.
Mhm.
So I really enjoy looking at advertisements. In fact, when I'm interested in buying something new, like I wish to buy a new camera or I wish to buy a new car, what I do is I really look carefully at the advertisement to see what's out. I read the reviews. I go out and try to find the objects and test them myself. But advertising plays a good role.
Mhm.
But, you know, there's a famous book called The Design for a Better World written by Papanak, a famous designer in the 1970s. In his book in 1971, the first sentence is, there is no field more harmful than design.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is the second sentence is, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the worst field is advertising. Why is design bad? Well, because it's destroying the world, the way it designs things, the way it builds all sorts of useless items just for the sake of use of selling something, even though it has no purpose in the world. And advertisers, well, they're evil because they convince people to buy all the stuff they don't really need.
Indeed, yeah.
So both of us are guilty. But but I have often found that the best people who ever to work on a problem is someone who believed the opposite and learned differently and is now understand exactly why they were doing what they were doing and why it's maybe the wrong thing to have done. But because it wasn't done maliciously, we never had thought about the larger picture before.
Mhm. Yeah. There is also a great book of Papanek called Green Imperative. And there is also a nice quote from this book. You are responsible for what you are putting in the world. And that might be an idea, that might be a
But
product.
he's wrong. But he's wrong.
Oh,
And here's why he's wrong.
second piece. Yeah.
It's, what he's trying to say is correct, and the spirit is absolutely correct. But who has the power in this world? And it's not designers. And so you asked me this question, what should I tell the youth, the people just starting in the world? Yes. It's your responsibility to clean up the mess that we have left behind us.
Mhm.
But how do you go about doing that? If you have a job and you're in a company and you think, oh, you're not manufacturing things right, you're destroying the environment, you're using slave labor in these other countries to build it, this, that, and the other, you can't go and tell your executives that, oh, you're doing things wrong. You just started, you have no credibility. Why would they listen to you? And if you actually look at where design sits in a company, it's almost always in the middle levels. It's considered important infrastructure, but almost never is it in the decision-making side of the company. Why not? Why isn't there a chief design officer in every major large company? There are very few chief design officers in large companies. Why? And even those, sometimes they just have the title of chief design officer, but they're not called upon to decide in what direction the company will move. Well, here's what we teach in design. We teach you must understand your customer. You must understand the people who use the products you're designing, products, services, whatever. You have to understand them.
Mhm.
Well, the people you work for are one of your customers. Do you understand what your boss needs, or more importantly, what the boss of your boss needs? Do you know how to talk to them? And I ask designers, how do you, they tell me, nobody listens to us in the company. We have all sorts of good ideas that they don't listen to us. And I say, how do you tell them? Well, we show them the work we've done. We show them the diagrams, the sketches, the prototypes. We show them the awards we've won. And I say, yeah, if I were the executive and you came to me and told me that, I'd say, yes, that's very nice. Of course, that's why we hired you. We knew you were good. So, but now, excuse me, I must get back to work. You're not talking the language of executives. You have to understand the people you're designing for. Some of the people are your superiors. And what do they worry about? They worry about the success of the company. Are we making enough money to keep in business? And
Mhm.
I was at Apple Computer when Apple was failing. And we spent a lot of time wondering about what we needed to do to increase the sales. We thought we had the very best computer in the world, but people were not buying it. And so you have to talk about sales, profits, margins, understand the language of finance, and the best tool that they use to understand what is going on is a spreadsheet. So if you have a nice idea or if you think that we're manufacturing wrong, don't go and tell them you're doing things wrong. Executives don't like it when people come and say you're doing things wrong. Not because they don't want to know. A good executive needs to know what's going on, but they want the solution. And you have to therefore provide a solution. But you can't say the proper thing is a circular economy where we reuse all the parts and things last longer and can be repaired and don't destroy the environment. Because the answer to that is, yeah, you're going to put me out of business. We sell things. And so you're telling me I shouldn't sell as many things, they should last longer and so on. So we'll go out of business. So you have to have an answer to that. You have to have a complete business model. You have to say, there's a different model where we could do even more than we're doing today, but without harming the environment. And usually that means switching from selling products to selling experiences and services. Now, actually, every product is really a service. You
Hmm.
sell, maybe you're making a camera, but what's the purpose of the camera? It's not to put on your shelf and look at it. The purpose of a camera is to provide a service, namely the wonderful experiences you have when you look at the photographs and when you use the photographs. And almost every physical product is actually something that provides a service for people. And so we can change the model, but that means you have to be reasonably expert at business, but also about, well, we need new materials. We need to change our manufacturing methods. We can't put these materials, smelt the materials together so that they can't be taken apart and reused. You have to understand all sorts of different things. Now, no single person can understand all of this, but the team can. So it's really important that every design team have somebody expert in all of the different components that makes the business work so that they can make not only tell the people that we're doing it wrong, but tell them here's an idea that we could change the way we're doing things without changing the company and actually even maybe be more successful. And this is hard. And you can't do it when you first come to a company because you have to earn your credibility, earn the right to be able to make suggestions of this sort. So it takes a few years because you have to learn how the company works. You have to learn the people. So one of the most important things to do when you join a new company, make friends with everybody. Not in your design group. Make friends with marketing, make friends with advertising, make friends with manufacturing, make friends with the engineers, make friends with the supply chain people. Because all of this goes together to talk about the product, and you can't just make a better design. In fact, people who just design something are worthless. A design isn't any good. It doesn't accomplish anything until it is actually built. And so you therefore have to understand how it's actually built and distributed and sold and where the parts come from and how the parts are created and the materials. So the design community has to change and step up to this challenge.
Yeah.
And it's a very fun challenge to be in, by the way. That's where we get leaders. That's where designers would suddenly become the heads of companies and chief design officers of companies. But you can't, therefore, get there simply by saying, I am a brilliant designer, therefore you should make me head of something. No, you may be a brilliant designer, and that's good. We need people like that. But a
Hmm.
brilliant designer is not necessarily a good administrator, a good executive. So we need a few people in every design group who understand how to change the world.
You mentioned about the way of teaching design or design education, and I see your career path fascinating. You started in cognitive science, psychology, computer science,
No,
and
I
then
started in engineering,
engineering, actually. Yeah, yeah, indeed. And then you,
and then psychology, but it was mathematical psychology.
yeah,
So I ended up with a PhD, and what was I an expert in? Not in people. I knew how the ear worked.
yeah. But long story short, your journey was really into a journey of is really interdisciplinary. And
Mhm.
do you think design education, I mean, purely design education in design schools, is too siloed within design schools? Can we genuinely equip future designers to tackle today's complex challenges if we teach design only to designers? Maybe the approach is wrong. Maybe design schools are too narrow-minded to deal with the current world's challenges, or I don't know. Because I'm asking this question because the conversation about design education here in Poland is really hot, actually, because we are discussing the way how to practically implement transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary into design curriculum. It can't be a buzzword only as well. Let's do interdisciplinary project with some kind of partner, bring interdisciplinarity into curriculum, how to do it, and is it even a good idea?
Ah, what a wonderful question. And it just so happens I've written a paper on this problem.
Oh, lovely.
Uh, a friend of mine he's actually from Argentina in South America, but is teaching in Lucerne, Switzerland, is writing a book on social science and design. And why don't we have more social scientists working in design and vice versa? And he asked me to write a chapter. And I've stopped writing chapters for other people, but he's a good friend. And so I said, okay. But I didn't write a chapter on why we should use social science in design because he's gotten all sorts of people together to write these chapters. And I said, let them talk about it. I want to say is that we shouldn't change design education by bringing in other disciplines. We should change all education. The problem is the way, because the problems you mentioned about the narrow silos is, yeah, it's true in design, but it's true in every piece of education today. The only place you get broad, wonderful education is when you first start school in the kindergarten and the first primary grades, where you have interesting problems are given to you and you're learning a little bit about the world. And it's only as you advance up the stages from primary to secondary school that you start having subjects where you learn only history or only arithmetic or only geography or whatever. And that's the start of the silos. And then universities are worse because, oh, universities want to have the best professors. So how do you get the best professors? Well, everybody can't be the best. Well, maybe they can if you have so many tiny little fields of specialties that I'm the very best in the world. I like to claim that sometimes I'm the very best person in the world in this field. Why? Because I'm the only person in this field. Of course, being the only person is kind of worthless if nobody else cares at all about what you're doing. But the age of specialization has gotten in the way of everything. When you get ill and you go to a doctor, you're seen by specialists, and each specialist doesn't see you as a person, they see you as their specialty. And so they may give you a response and medication and so on that is actually contradictory to what other specialists have also given you. Nobody sees you as a person anymore. And the same is true of almost every discipline. The humanities are dying because there's a big emphasis today on STEM education, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Well, I was highly trained in STEM in all four of those. But notice there's nothing about people, nothing about humanity, nothing about history, nothing about literature, nothing about philosophy, nothing about ethics. Where does that come from? So I think we have to change, and the, and it's one thing to say let's have multidisciplinary education, let's bring specialists together. Yes, that's important, and I'm a firm believer that first of all, teaching by lecturing is the world's worst way to learn. Now, lectures are really good at giving you motivation, explaining how things fit together. But when you want to learn the complexity and in depth how to do things in a field, lectures are not how to do it. It's projects, doing things, making things. And what's good about real projects, not fake ones for the class, but real projects, is they require putting together many, many different disciplines. So you have to learn to work equally with the other disciplines. Now, one of the hard parts about that is teaching it. People who try to teach multidisciplines say it's one of the hardest courses they've ever taught. First of all, they're not used to talking to their other professors from the other disciplines. And second of all, the students often have mistaken ideas. There's a wonderful course that I went to that I visited once. I was visiting MIT, the engineering university, where I had been an undergraduate. And they said, "Oh, you're here today, and we're going to go on down to RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design, because we teach a course jointly with them. So, and they're giving their final papers today. So come and listen." So I drove down to, it was a several hour drive to the other city in Rhode Island. And the courses were really excellent. The lectures, the projects people were presented were some of the best I've ever seen. And I said, why is that? And they said, we require every project to have one engineer from MIT, one business school student from MIT, and designers from the Rhode Island School of Design. And when you talk to the professors, though, they said, getting that started was impossible. All the business people thought they should be in charge. All the engineers thought they were the most important component. And all of the designers felt that nobody was listening to them as they did their wonderful stuff. And the hardest part was getting them to learn to respect one another and that every single person had something new and interesting and important to contribute and forget about who's in charge. That isn't what matters. What matters is what you produce and how you do it. And quite often in companies, it's the project manager who's in charge. And what is their training? It could be anything. They could be a training in literature. They could be training in languages. They could be training in history because their skill is not the technology. That's what the different disciplines are. Their skill is learning how to work with everybody and kind of being a psychiatrist, working with difficult people and getting them to contribute together and to realize that everybody has something important to contribute. That's the skill that's most important in the world. And that is not being taught. And I think the way to teach it is we should start off with project education. You're given interesting projects to do. Now, we like to think that if you're going to be a designer, you have to have certain fundamental skills. Yeah. So that what you should do is make sure they get assigned, students get assigned to project A and they're going to learn certain skills in design. And then they get assigned to project B and they'll learn different skills. And project C, so that in the end they get the skills you need. So the basic introduction is how to work in teams. And then after that, people can go on to specialize because we really need great graphic artists who are really skilled at the detailed work of doing graphic art, or industrial designers, or interaction designers, or other designers of all sorts. But it's really good to start off by having a basic world view and understanding how things in the world fit together, including. So if you take a look at this book, Design for a Better World, which I said has to be meaningful, sustainable, and humanity-centered, I start off with history. I start off with physics and some of the guidelines of how to measure things in physics, which do not apply to the measurement of things for people and have been misunderstood by many people in the world, including the economists. And the economists rule the world today with their wonderful mathematics, which is all wrong because they don't understand people. Yet they rule the world. Why? We have to change economics. Unfortunately, economics itself is changing. And I talk about all sorts of different fields that are not normally taught about in design. And it makes a difference. It makes you understand things. And it makes you understand why these other disciplines are very important.
Yeah.
But it's a different way of teaching. And I think it has to apply not to design, but to the entire school system.
Hmm. I hope my students can purely hear what you said about I would call it social competencies like teamwork, communication, and stuff like that. Because what we are trying to do at graphic design department, what I teach, is to implement a deep combination of design, craft, and communication science or social science in general. Because if you want to be a good visual designer, you need to understand the perspective of the user, of a person, and the society as well. And the communication is the thing you need to consider at the first point. I really like this phrase of Robert Kozma, who said that the design is a glue for society. I think communication is a glue for the society because, at the end of the day, you're responsible of the world of code, science, brands, lifestyles, and behavior of the people you are designing for. So, and that's the thing that we need to implement into design education, right?
Yes, so here's a problem I have with graphic design, and design in general, by the way. Design is often in the art department.
Yeah.
Call it art and design, and I think that's completely wrong. That design is not art, and art is not design. And I'm not. This is not a value statement. I believe that design is very important in the world, and that art is very important in the world, but they're very different. Artists are expressing often emotions and opinions and trying to make you think and rediscover things. But so much of graphics design has been taken over by the artists so that you have wonderful signs that are beautiful. I remember I once was giving a lecture and I was walking down the hall in the university where my lecture was to be, and I saw an announcement of my lecture. And it was beautiful, but I couldn't figure out what room it would be in or what day it was going to be held at. It was art. And so I took off the poster and I brought it into my lecture and I tried to talk about the need that graphic designers should be communicating. That's the purpose of graphic design, to communicate things, messages. And I held this up. And of course, the person who designed that poster was in the audience, who was very upset and angry at me for criticizing it. But was it a good piece of art? Yes. But that's not what graphic design is about. It's about, as you said, communication. And
Mm.
that's a problem that designers face all over, that they're misunderstood. By the way, almost every field is misunderstood. Computer science, oh, that's programming. No, it isn't. That's only one small part of computer science. Mathematics, yeah, that's that dreary stuff that we have to learn arithmetic and algebra and calculus. No, that's not what mathematics is about. People don't, from a distance, don't understand what goes on in today's fields. Mechanical engineering. Oh, good. I get to build these mechanical things. I really love to build things, to construct things. Well, it turns out it's mostly applied mathematics. It's doing very, very advanced different projects. And so yeah, that's why it's good to have projects and bring people together. You begin to understand what a field is good at and what it's not good at, and where it can help you, and where you can, the combination of multiple fields together can create things that none of the fields by themselves could do.
I think, Don, after this conversation, you are joining my club, and this is a club of public enemy of the art schools in Poland. So welcome to the club. I want to make
I'm
your
not against art schools. I want that to be clear. I'm against the notion that art and design are together, and design is sort of a subset of art. Design is a kind of applied art. No, no, that's not what design is.
Yeah, and if you want to tackle any wicked problem, simple design studio skills are truly useless. First, you need to understand the world you want to work with. So maybe that's the thing, actually. So understanding the world, then try to tackle the problem with your design studio skills or any other craft skills.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, Quick reminder for our audience, you are free to ask questions on the chat. I see many questions on my second screen. Sorry for not asking those questions during this conversation. Uh, I'll try to put them on the agenda later during our conversation. But I have to ask you, Donald, one more thing, because in the interview I mentioned at the beginning of our meeting, you argued about user experience, which you actually introduced to the world. You were the first user experience designer at Apple, as I remember. You
At
said that,
any company, yes.
yeah, yeah, indeed. You said that you don't like how user experience is being used these days. Interestingly, the World Economic Forum report describes UX and UI as the fastest growing profession by 2030. So, what is wrong with UX? Maybe not what is wrong with UX, what is wrong with the semantics or the usage of UX in the market or in the design education?
Actually, I find this a common occurrence that a new term comes into the world from some discipline, and as people begin to understand it, it grows in popularity. But as it grows in popularity, it gets misunderstood more and more and more, and people oversimplify what the word means. So the word affordance, which I didn't invent, but a friend of mine did, a psychologist, a perceptual psychologist, I applied affordance to design, and it got really misused badly. And user experience, what does it mean today? It often means building a website or building an app for a phone.
Yeah.
No, it's about If you really want to go and experience great user experiences, go to a play or go to a Disney theme park. I don't care whether you like Disney or not, but go because see how they make your attendance there into a real experience because they want you to stay the entire day and to have enjoyed it. So they want you to eat, they want you to enjoy things, they want you to see different kinds of exhibits, they want you to take part in different kinds of rides. Now, one of the things is that you have to wait in line for the rides, and that's a negative experience. And so Disney has tried all sorts of different techniques to make it a positive experience. Like you can sign up in advance and then you're told what time to show up for so you don't have to wait in line. Or even if you're waiting in line, guess what? You're you're in line and finally you come in and there's this big room and you go into this big room and somebody gets up and tells you the story behind what you're about to experience. And quite often there are wonderful graphics and moving objects on the walls. So you can get that, you can understand what they're talking about. Well, you think that's good. That's part of the ride, isn't it? I've learned a lot about what I'm about to experience. Yeah, but it's also a way of making standing in line enjoyable. So you don't even realize you're standing in line. You think, oh, I'm now finally into the entertainment. And so that's what experience is about. It's about everything: discovering the product, discovering the service, discovering what you're about to involve, reading about it, learning about it, watching films about it, traveling there, doing it, or buying it, opening the box, opening the box. Apple is a master at making it fun to open the box. And when you open the box, you see this wonderful thing you've bought and it's ready to go. I remember I was being asked by a company to evaluate their product. It was a camera. So I said, okay, but make believe I've just ordered the camera and it comes in the mail. So I want you to mail it to me as if I had ordered it in the mail. So they mailed it to me and I get this box and I opened it up. And when you opened it up, the first thing you see was well, it's called a CD-ROM, but it doesn't matter what it doesn't. They don't exist today. But it was this disc you're supposed to put it into the machine and watch the screen on your television set. Um, what? No, no, I just bought the camera. I want to use it. And then the next thing you see is an instruction manual. And the next thing you see is something else. And you finally get to the camera and it's sort of hidden. And you take it off the paper and you hold it in your hand and say, wonderful, I want to take a picture. And there's a big sticker on it that says, charge the battery for 24 hours before you use. What? It should be charged. Now, if you charge it and the charge leaks out, so there may not be a full charge by the time it gets to the person, that's okay. Have enough charge so it takes one or two pictures. That's all. Because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to see how it works. Let it work. And with an Apple, first of all, it comes in a box that's beautiful. They spent a lot of money on the box. I used to ask people, do you throw away the boxes stuff comes in? Oh, yes. Do you throw away the box of something that an Apple thing came in? No, I keep the box because the box is part of the experience. And when you open it up, you experience the wonderful product that you've just bought. So this is a small example of experience means everything. It isn't just the usage. It's all the things
The
go around
buttons.
the
Yeah.
usage. It isn't just the buttons and so on. It includes that.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's just the part that reminds me also the problem of design thinking. I think it's the probably the same issue. An
Yes.
excellent mindset was brought down to a simple method, infantilizing the design process with the post-its, young people standing in front of the wall and doing nice things. This is not design is all about. Design thinking is something more, is a mindset of thinking about the challenge, the problem, the goal we need to achieve, and stuff like that. It's not about post-its, isn't it?
Well, it is about Post-its turn out to be a really valuable thinking tool, but exactly as you said. Uh, in fact, when design thinking became popularized, mainly by the people at the company IDEO and the Stanford D schools, so-called, a lot of designers were really annoyed. We've been doing design thinking for years and years, decades. What is all this? It's not nothing new. But popularizing design thinking had some positive results. Namely, it made people realize that design wasn't just making something beautiful, but it was the way you approached the problem. And what they did was they took the fun part of design thinking, of design, which is sitting around a table and coming up with new ideas, outrageous ideas, good ideas, bad ideas, and trying to say, put them down together, try to figure out what's good, what's bad. Because even a bad idea often has some interesting components that could be used in some other idea. So learning how to do this type of development and learning how post-it notes are very good because you can put little segments of your ideas on different post-it notes, and then as you go through thinking about it, they're easy to move and resort and put them in different places and structure differently. But that's only a small piece of design, and it's actually the most fun and interesting part. So if you've learned how to do that well, that's good. It's useful, but it's not, as you point out. It's only a small component of what design is about. It doesn't, for example, address are you solving the right problem? Doesn't address how you work together with other groups. Doesn't address actually how you transform this wonderful post-it note organizational structure you created. How do you actually transform that into action, into being able to do something?
Mm.
So it had good parts and bad parts. But yeah, it oversimplified. And unfortunately, people now take a short course and they think, oh, I'm designers.
Yeah.
Well, personally, people think that's bad if everybody thinks they're a designer. And I say, no, everybody is a designer. But you know what? Everybody is not everybody, but lots of people are tennis players. Lots of people are chess players. Lots of people drive cars. Um, That doesn't mean that you're an expert at doing any of this, but it also means you appreciate. If you watch a tennis game, you really appreciate the skill because you know how difficult it is to do what the professionals are doing.
Mhm.
And so that's where I'd like to see design move, or learning some of the basics of design, which is important in all fields because it's design has no content. That's its power. We don't know anything. We have is a method, a set of methods that can be applied to anything. And that makes us powerful because if you know something about a field, it's very difficult to come out with original ideas. You're stuck in what you've learned, all the stuff you've learned in school, all the stuff you've learned in your work about how this field works. But you know what? The designer comes in and says, well, does it have to work that way? Isn't there some other way of approaching the problem? And designers, because they don't have this knowledge, can often come up with stuff that's really valuable.
Mhm.
Designers come up with stupid questions. And the most powerful question could be a stupid question because it's when somebody's, why is it stupid? Well, everybody knows the answer. Why does everybody know the answer? Well, hey, we've always been doing it this way. Okay, is there some other way you might be doing it?
Mhm.
People don't think about that. Designers do. So yeah, we don't. It's important to. We need to simplify so people can understand, but let's not confuse the simplification with the entire process.
Mhm. Maybe it's high time to get rid of all of those, design labels like service design, design thinking, legal design, Safari design, and any other design we will come up as a new idea, as a pig flying through the village, right? So maybe it's high time to say, I really like this idea that design has no content. It's a method of doing something. It's an action of doing something in a proper manner.
Yes, but I should. I tend to do yes, but instead of yes and. Uh, yes, and actually, I wrote a book. I wrote an article once with Roberto Bergatti in the Harvard Business Review about yes and but. That because criticism is very powerful, and the notion that you shouldn't criticize, no, 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 criticism can move you forward. So it's good to say yes, that's a good idea, and we should expand it in this way. But it also has this problem. So yes, it's good that designers shouldn't think that they're an expert in one special form of design, and they don't even they often don't even understand the other kinds of design because any product requires all of these things put together. And but so we actually do need the specialists, but we also need each of the specialists. That's why I suggest that before you do the specialist education, you learn about how the components are put together and how you need many different fields and points of view. So that it is important that we have people who are really good experts at doing something. And that's what they're good at and nothing else necessarily. But you understand where they are important to use, and they understand why they aren't the entire story. That's I think important. And I don't think we can get away with without specialties today because the amount of information that exists in the world is just immense. And every single field now covers so many things that it's impossible to really understand the whole field. And so we have people who are really experts at small components, but we have to recognize that that's good in the university and the increasing of knowledge. But when you're actually trying to accomplish something, you have to bring together all these different specialties to be able to create anything.
Mhm.
So unfortunately, universities reward specialists. You get promoted because you're the world's best. So you write all these papers in the journals. Generalists are the ones who actually accomplish something in the world, who put it all together. They don't get promoted in universities because, well, I did a paper here, and I did a paper in this other field there, and I built this wonderful thing. I have a saying that if you publish a paper in Nature or Science magazine, many of you may not have heard about them, but Nature is a British magazine of science, and Science is an American magazine of science, and they're the two most influential journals in the world, and very difficult to get something published in them. If you get it published in those papers, you get promoted. But
Mm.
if you do something that saves thousands of lives, people say, that's nice.
Yeah, that's said, but true speaking. Yeah. Mm. Um, In our university, we have a faculty that consists three different departments: the Department of Journalism, the Department of Graphic Design, which is mine, and the Department of Law. So we came up for the idea of legal design, which is obviously not new, but we are trying to discuss in this kind of, quite exotic environment how we can collaborate together. And obviously, legal design requires the communication part, the part of visual, and obviously the legal context. And we are trying to do legal design in an educative way, in a popularization way, and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, the problem is that legal design is basically perceived as doing nice in visual way legal documents. So that's why I'm concerning about all those labels these days.
Well,
Legal.
let me try to change your mind. First of all, I find it interesting that your university has three departments, all of which are professions.
Yeah.
They're not academic departments. They have academic components, but their job, all three are things that actually do things in the real world.
Yeah.
Lawyers, journalists, designers. Second, let's take the problem of design. If you actually look at laws, they're about human behavior. Almost every law. I like to tell people to read the Ten Commandments in the Bible. If you want to know how people used to behave, look to see what the Ten Commandments say you should not do. All the things they say you should not do, why did they have to say you shouldn't do it? Because people were doing it. So now you know how people behave. All the things that the laws say you shouldn't do are how people actually do things. So first of all, you have to understand human behavior to understand law. Second, there's an area that's starting to really grow. It's called policy design. And that's a part that is often done by lawyers and politicians. But two countries that I know of, the Netherlands and the UK, especially England, are starting to bring in thousands of designers actually into the government to help them design policy. Because what do we say about designing? You have to know your customers. You have to understand how they work and what they do. You have to understand the people you're designing for. And not only that, but we're talking about human behavior, so you're apt to get it wrong. So it's really important to try it out, to prototype, test, see if it works. people who do design of policy and design writing of policy is a design job, but they just have these ideas about how people ought to behave or about how people or what they ought to say, and they never bother to test it. They never bother to bring in the people that who will be affected by the policy to understand how they behave. And so when you bring designers in, there's a whole different approach to designing those policies, and designers can be extremely valuable. And a few countries are starting to recognize that. And a few countries are bringing more and more designers into government to help them devise the policies, because government is mostly about policies.
Yeah.
Now, policies are a little bit like designs, by the way. Policy by itself is meaningless because it's all these wonderful words. So what really matters is how the policy is implemented and how it's carried out. But that's the same issue in design. And so the same issues we have in design to make sure we are also part of the team that's implementing it, part of the manufacturing team, part of the programming team, part of the engineering team, part of the sales team, part of the service team applies to policies as well. And
Mm.
the notion that in design that we never quite get it right because we're talking about people. So you have to continually iterate. That seldom occurs to lawyers. You think you write it down and there it is for the rest of life. Or politicians, who say, well, we don't have time. We get one chance at writing this and doing it, but we can't keep going back and back and back. Well, you could if you designed it differently so that it was easy to do simple modifications as what you've done maybe worked better than you expected. And so, oh, I want to do more of that. Or maybe isn't working the way you expected, so you want to modify it. And so designers can play a very powerful role if you rethink about how this work is being done. So that, yes, what you pointed out is the surface meaning. Oh, we're going to bring designers into policy making. Oh, we'll have them draw effective diagrams so people can understand what we're saying. No. Yes, that's good. You should be doing that. But you should help, the designer should be helping determine the policy in the first place by using our standard, if you like, humanity-centered design principles.
Mhm. Speaking about human behavior, you once made an interesting distinction between human behavior and design purpose, design objects. You said that design is not about objects, which is obviously somehow, it's about human behavior. Can you unpack it somehow?
Okay, basically, I have to qualify what the word design means. Um, because there's things like circuit design, which is how I started out my life, and engineering design, biological design, design of experiments, all this, which isn't about human behavior. So, but in the design profession itself, we are building things usually for companies, for organizations, or people.
Hmm.
And so there, the human behavior is critical because we have to understand what people are thinking, how they use something. And quite often people don't use things the way that you expected them to. Even if after you've done all your tests and you see that it really works for what I expect, they'll end up using it in ways you never expected. And on the one hand, that's good. And as you start using things in ways you never expected, if you keep watching, you say, oh, I see what they're trying to do, but what we designed isn't really the best way of doing that. It may be better than anything else that exists today, but now I can even make it even better by learning how people actually are using what I'm doing.
Hmm.
Or you may discover they're using it in harmful ways. And so now you try to say, wait a minute, that was not our intention. And so you try to come back and put in, well, sometimes they're called guardrails and other ways of preventing the misuse of the designs. But human behavior is at the core of what design is all about.
Hmm.
Well, let me stop. No, people are. So I call the work I'm doing now humanity centered, and people complain, oh no, you're still stuck on people. We have to design for the planet. So we want planet centered design, or for life, we want life centered design, or for all of life, not just people. And I say, you're right. And I define humanity-centered design to be all of that, that we worry about all living things, about the ecological system and so on. But if you look at the people who want to do planet-centered design or life-centered design, we're all talking about the same thing.
Mhm.
Because, look, if you want to say X-centered design, there's only one word you have to choose, and there's no way of choosing a single word that has the proper meaning. So we've chosen different words, but we're all on the same page. We're all trying to do the same things. So yeah, so I'd like to think that in one sense we are human behavior is critical, but that's not completely true anymore. It's because we have to also consider the impact on all living things and
Mhm.
the ecological system.
Yeah. What would you say if we turn out from human behavior into communication, social communication, and the culture as a profound level of what we are doing, what we are feeling, what we know about the world, and how, at the end of the day, we use the world of code, science, and brands?
Yes, um, because I think what what we need is a half-page description of what design is, and maybe a full page, but it has to be short so people will read it. Because a three-letter, a three-word name, human-centered, humanity-centered, whatever, can't capture it.
Yeah.
Even design thinking can't capture it. Uh, so you might want a word three word description, but then underneath it there should be a one paragraph thing that tries to say things like what you just said. That, that our goal is, and talk about the overall approach and what we're trying to accomplish.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, these days, you can't have a conversation without mentioning artificial intelligence, obviously. And in your book, in your latest book, you highlight three of the most significant historical influences. The one was modernity, the second was industrial revolution, and the third one was economic theory. And don't you think we are facing the fourth one? I mean, the artificial intelligence. What do you think about it?
Yes, I was writing the book as the very first large language models were being developed, but they had not yet entered into the world. And even though I knew about these models, I didn't realize the impact they would have. But actually, it's interesting that I'm friends with many of the people who developed them, and they didn't expect the results that happened. They were all very surprised about what these models were doing and about the rapid acceptance around the world, despite all the flaws that they have. The flaws are real. They're biased. They make up things. They lie, which is very interesting because whoever thought that we could build quickly a computer that would lie to you? And interestingly, it doesn't know that it's lying, but it's lying. And it makes up things. But that's a whole new approach. But I want to point out that we are in the middle of a number of very important technological revolutions. This is a really interesting time in the world. Technology revolutions have changed lots of things. Sort of the biggest revolution was the invention of writing. And but yes, the Industrial Revolution was critically important, and then a lot of the things that got developed during the Industrial Revolution changed our lives. And today we are inventing new types of materials, new ways of manufacturing, new types of sensors so we can sense and measure and experience things inside the body. And oftentimes from outside the body, we can see what's going on inside the body. Things that we can sensors that are in drones. A drone itself is a whole new type of aircraft, if you will, that's getting more and more important in the world. It's very difficult today to watch a movie or video story that doesn't have lots of photography from drones.
Mhm.
And it's used for much more than just photography for video. And it's also the sensors are being used in satellites and in telescopes that are being put out into space that are seeing new things. The new pictures that come out of what what, what the sky looks like I always thought the sky was just, little dots of light, which were suns and so on. And the fact that it's this continuous clouds and surveys and colors and so on, wow, that's new. And then trying to understand what's going on, that's also new. And the fact that we can put sensors together so you can use light and sound and X-ray and MRIs and put them all together into one image that's meaningful and shows you different things, that's a big revolution. It's going to change medicine, it's going to change manufacturing, it's going to change many things in our lives. And so there are lots and lots of different revolutions, transportation methods. But yeah, one of them is artificial intelligence and what it's doing. And I think that will change our lives and change a lot of what we do. Take graphic design.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you design instead of sitting down with your pen and paper or on a computer program and to draw and sketch and then fill it out and refine it? Instead, sit down in front of a microphone and say, I'm trying to depict and describe what you're trying to do and let it draw something and you say, no, that's not right, and modify it and modify it and eventually come out with what you really wanted, but what was different than anything you could have done. Or what today is getting more and more possible, you draw a broad sketch of what you're interested in and give that to the machine and say, this is what I want, and but refine it. Actually, I'm I'm working with a charity, the Don Norman Design Award, and we're trying to restructure ourselves. And what I was intending to do this morning, and I'm starting to do, is I'm trying to draw an organization chart of all the things we're trying to accomplish and what we need and the kinds of people we need to do it. And I decided I would do a rough sketch and I would feed it into one of these graphic machines and say, okay, put this together in a way that's more understandable and so on. And so I think the way we do our work is going to change. And so your fields, each of these fields, every one of our fields will change. And I don't mean just in design, but in many, many fields. But I like to point out that when calculators were first developed, there was a horrible cry by the teachers and by parents that, oh my goodness, don't let them use it in school because they won't learn arithmetic, they won't learn algebra, and they weren't permitted. So they prevented them from being used in schools.
Mhm.
But over the years, people discovered they were actually useful. And so today, it's not only permitted, it's required. It's quite often in advanced classes of things, you are required to bring in your calculator. Because the calculator can solve algebraic equations, even calculus equations, and of course, arithmetic. I recall the days when I took a course in rocket design at MIT. This was a long time ago. We would get a homework assignment, and it would take us a week to solve the homework problem. And almost every student in the class got it wrong. Not because we didn't understand, but because there was so much calculation to be done once you got the basic equation that we invariably made errors in the equations or
Mhm.
even in the arithmetic. So today, that same problem can be done as an overnight homework assignment because you try to understand the problem good and you write down the equations good and then you give it to your calculator which will solve it and even plot graphs and do all sorts of wonderful things. And that doesn't take away your abilities, that increases your abilities. Because now I can sit back and think about what the result is and say, that's interesting. I don't think that's right. That means I didn't define it properly. Let me think about how I described the problem. And I think that's what's going to happen to the design profession. We learn that it will help us do things faster than we can do it by ourselves and differently because this intelligence is artificial. It's not human. And so sometimes the things that comes out will be meaningless or worthless. And sometimes, oh, I never thought of doing it that way. And so,
Mhm.
but it will make us better designers because instead of focusing upon the skills, the manual skills of drawing and producing things, we'll have to use our thinking skills as designers to think about what the real issues are and whether what is being produced is exactly what we need.
You mentioned about this calculator thing. I would add to that remote control, internet or computers, internet, artificial intelligence. They are just tools, or they are tools. But what's missing, I think, is the context of usage.
Yeah,
So,
well, but I don't think that these large language models and the modern AIs are
yeah,
tools anymore because they are tools with their own goals, their own intentions.
yeah.
They could develop their own ideas of what they should be doing. They are more collaborators than tools.
But
And
it's even scarier because remote control is not just a tool. It has changed the world. We are watching TV or spending free time after work, etc., etc. The first computers and the computers also changed the way we work, the way we live, the way we have fun, etc., etc. And the same is going to be with artificial intelligence. It's changed the world, but we are having just an introduction to the tools, but not the social context of the tools. How to introduce artificial intelligence to the world. That is a game changer for many disciplines, many people, but use it in ethical way to avoid, the things like deep fakes, disinformation, hate speech, etc., etc. That's the challenge we are standing in front of.
and here's my answer. That's your job. By you, I don't mean you. I mean the audience, for the younger generation of designers. So instead of complaining about AI, instead of saying it's not really, it's working in a way that is not good or whatever, well, why don't you get hired by the AI companies? The AI companies could use good designers to help define and build and construct these systems so that they actually are doing the appropriate behavior. Because a lot of the technologists, here we go again, they're STEM technologists. They know science, technology, engineering, mathematics. They don't know people. They don't know society. They don't know ethics. They don't know history. That's not true of everyone. There's a lot of people who are really good at many things, but we need more people like the design community working to help develop AI into a powerful, useful, and positive collaborator. So but don't you have to remember that how long has it been? These have been out just a few years. It often takes a decade for anything to settle down and for people to understand all of its implications. And you'd probably notice it seems to change every week, certainly every month as people bring out new systems, new ways of doing it, new opportunities, new ways of using these systems. Some of the most important work is being done not in the people who announce, I just brought out a new version of GPT 73 or something. No, a lot of the work is people who are assembling small startup companies saying, oh, I see how we can use this to make better food. And so they're taking the LLMs and this program and this component and that component. I've already been feeding them the entire contents of this book and the other book and lots of things we're doing, and trying to see how that could be used to inform people and educate. Because instead of reading separate books, it now has one combined database, which is made up of all of my books. So you can answer any question, and it jumps across books and answering it in very interesting ways. Not yet ready for release, I don't think, as a teaching tool, but very close. And in fact, the Khan Academy, which is very good at making very short videos for teaching, they're using AI now as personal tutors, and they feel that it may not replace human tutors, except that there aren't enough human tutors to go around. And even if there are, even if you have a good tutor, well, if you're working on a problem at 3 o'clock in the morning, your human tutor isn't around, but the AI tutor is. And so I think it's going to change education too, but we need people who are experts in the usage areas to help design these things.
Yeah,
And that's where designers can play a very important, valuable role.
yeah. You mentioned the Khan Academy. They published a new book, Brave New Words. how AI will revolutionize education and why that is a good thing. I think this is a really nice book that introduced the artificial intelligence not only as technological something, but in the context of education, and that works with education actually.
I do. I also recommend that book.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, indeed. We are running out of time, and I want to ask you about one more thing at the end of this magnificent discussion. I want to ask about the Norman Design Award, the NDA. Um, it's not another um, design festival award for the same bunch of designers and their bubbles. Can you tell us more about this wonderful initiative?
My friends wanted to establish a design award in my name, which I resisted for a while, but finally accepted it. But they wanted to give it to some well-known designer who did good. And I said, no, doesn't do any good. Once you get to be well-known, you get an award. Well, it's nice, but it doesn't change your life. In fact, you come home, I have this problem. You come home and you have this new trophy or new certificate, and where do I put it? I don't have any room.
Yeah,
It doesn't fit among all the other trophies I have. There's a big pile over there. You can't see it, thank goodness. So trophies and stuff I don't know what to do with. It's nice. I'm not saying it's not nice, but I wanted to give it to people just starting out when you need encouragement at that point. But we had several things in mind. First, we wanted to encourage early career people who are doing something good for society. They had to have some evidence, and it had to follow what I'm calling humanity-centered design principles, but it could be any variation of them. It doesn't have to be the ones that I developed. And second, it had to be one of the things that the United Nations talks about in its list of sustainable societal SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And we got last year was the first year we got hundreds of applications, and some of them were just so wonderful. From an early career, you could be 70 years old, but you've never done any work like this. And we gave an award to a group that they felt that the education of their children was suffering. There weren't any good schools near where they lived. They were in the outskirts of Tijuana, Mexico, and so they developed a new school system. And I went and actually visited them, and they aren't accredited. The Mexico doesn't recognize them. So they found a school in the United States that said, "You're doing great work," so that when your students graduate, we will give them a certificate, which allows them to get into colleges and so on. And they're doing this wonderful work, and it's all run by just two people who started it, and by the community. They made sure all the parents and all the families. And I went and attended a meeting with them, and not only did the students all showed up, but their parents all showed up, and it was wonderful. And we saw people in India, who everyday people gathered around to help people who were depressed and had mental health difficulties, and again, far away from traditional medical assistance. And people in Ghana who used technology. What they did was they taught people in Ghana how to use technology to overcome their own deficiencies. One person who had very bad vision learned how to make something that he could put on his head with a little camera that helped him see things better. And that's what it's about. It's about trying to get people to do themselves things that help them. In addition, we decided we would reward any educational group, didn't have to be a formal university or school, that was training people to do this. They had to have evidence of success as well, but the best evidence was not the curriculum, but was rather how many students have graduated and are now doing this kind of work. And now we're starting to bring in, we want to mentor. So people who get our awards, what do they do afterwards? Well, we're going to try to develop mentoring for them to help them further their career. And we're trying to bring in industry as well. And we're starting to develop a new prize for industry. I call it Design Your Own Award. So a company can say, oh, but but we would like something that's relevant to our business, but still fits your requirements, still fits a societal need. But the people who do it will develop skills that we will find useful and so on. And so we're just starting to introduce that now. And the goal, when we first started, I thought we were all alone. And I was talking on a podcast, and somebody told me about the Aga Khan Foundation, and I had never heard of them. And then they're doing humanity-centered design across the world, I discovered. And so I wrote them and said, gee, my name is Donald Norman, and here's what we're trying to do, et cetera. And it sounded like you're trying to do similar things. I wonder if we should talk. And I got back an answer like in an hour saying, yeah, we know who you are. Come to Geneva and talk to us. So I flew to Geneva, Switzerland, and had a wonderful meeting with them. And we decided that what we wanted to do was spread humanity-centered design across the world. And that's actually what I'm trying to do, to change the design profession from the way it's working now with an emphasis on doing consumer and business products to also considering working for society. And so we run an annual conference. We had one in San Diego, California, what was very successful. We brought in a whole bunch of the other companies. I'm discovering all sorts of nonprofit organizations across the world that are trying to do this. But I want them to talk to each other, to learn from each other's work. And I asked them to give talks where they did not say the wonderful things they've done. They, they would give a talk where they said where they failed.
Mhm.
Because talking, first of all, you learn more from a failure than from a success. Because a failure causes you to sit back and think hard about why it failed. And a success, you say, oh, I'm really smart, right? And second, I want the early career people just starting out to realize these very experienced places often failed. So don't give up. These are difficult problems. In fact, the most important problems in the world are the difficult ones because if they wasn't difficult, they wouldn't be problems anymore. And so learning how to deal with failure and learning what you learn from it and how you might overcome them and sharing your ideas with other people is really important. So this year we're just starting out again for this year, but the annual summit is going to be in Singapore. And every year we hope to have it in a different country because we really are international. And it's wonderful. It's just wonderful because it's a lot of work, but reading the applications they come in, they're wonderful. And and the awards, and after the awards are made, I try hard to visit as many as I can, and they're all over the world. So I've been to India a lot. I've been to Europe a lot. I'm now trying to plan a trip to Africa. It's really good, and we have judges and advisors um, all over the world. We had 18 last year, and this year we have about 25. And again, from countries all around the world that don't normally receive this kind of publicity, actually, or opportunities.
And please be invited to Poland as well, um, for the next maybe next summit of the NDA.
Yeah, we are inviting, we haven't done it yet, but we're trying to develop a solicitation letter for people to tell them what it means to run the summit and then inviting people to apply.
All right. We are good in organizing events, so if you consider Poland, please consider also University as WPS, I believe.
No, it works the other way around.
All right.
If you like us, please consider submitting a proposal to host it. But
Okay.
as
Okay.
I say, um, because what that means that we're trying to develop guidelines that we'll mail to you. They're not 90% finished yet, but not ready to distribute. And because we want to select a location several years in advance to give room to give time to develop. And that way you can develop and you can even correspond with us and say, well, we can't do that, but how about doing this instead? And we might say, yeah, that's a good idea.
All right. That sounds like a plan. Donald, thank you very much for meaningful, humanity-centered discussion. I thank you very much indeed for joining my invitation. And I thanks to all of the audience we had during this conversation. Thank you for your meaningful questions. I tried to reconfigure them during the conversation. I hope you like it. Donald, thank you very much once again, ladies and gentlemen. Donald Norman.
And thank you, because this was exactly the kind of conversation I hoped we would have. Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you.